नमस्कार, कार्यक्रम दक्ष नेपालमा स्वागत छ। कार्यक्रम दक्ष नेपाल आजदेखि सुरु भएको छ। यो कार्यक्रम हरेक शुक्रबार साँझ 6:30 बजे कान्तिपुर टेलिभिजनबाट प्रसारित हुनेछ। आजको कार्यक्रममा हामी शिक्षा, विज्ञान तथा प्रविधि मन्त्री, श्रम, रोजगार तथा सामाजिक सुरक्षा मन्त्रीसँगै युरोपियन युनियन, ब्रिटिश काउन्सिल तथा IOM नेपालका प्रतिनिधिसँग वैदेशिक रोजगारी र सिपसँग जोडिएका विविध विषयवस्तुमा कुराकानी गर्नेछौँ। विश्व बजारका लागि चाहिने प्राविधिक जनशक्ति उत्पादनका लागि सरकारले के पहल गरिरहेको छ र नेपाल फर्केका श्रमिकहरूको पुनर्एकीकरणको काम कसरी अगाडि बढिरहेको छ भन्ने सम्बन्धमा मैले शिक्षा, विज्ञान तथा प्रविधि मन्त्री माननीय देवेन्द्र पौडेलसँग कुराकानी गरेकी छु। नेपालमा विश्व बजार सुहाउँदो प्राविधिक र व्यावसायिक शिक्षाको विकास भएन भन्ने गरेको सुनिन्छ। वास्तवमा अवस्था कस्तो छ अहिले?
मेडिकलको पढाइ, इन्जिनियरिङको पढाइ, म्यानेजमेन्टको MBA लगायतका पढाइहरू, कतिपय चाहिँ आर्ट्सका केही विषयहरू राम्रै छन्। तर अब दुःखद कुरा र समस्या चाहिँ उत्पादित भएको जनशक्तिले रोजगारी प्राप्त गर्ने समस्या गम्भीर छ। त्यसो भएर विद्यार्थीहरू अलिकति बढी चाहिँ नेपालमा भन्दा पढाइ पनि हुने, रोजगार पनि हुने र पढाइ सक्दा बित्तिकै त्यही रोजगारमा सेटिङ हुने भएको हुँदाखेरि बाहिर जाने प्रचलन चाहिँ तीव्र रूपमा बढेर गएको छ। यो हो साँचो कुरा।
वैदेशिक रोजगारीमा जान खोज्नु भएको युवाहरूलाई दक्ष बनाएर पठाउनको लागि आवश्यक सिप र तालिम दिनको लागि मन्त्रालयबाट के पहलहरू भएका छन्?
स्नातक र स्नातकोत्तर पढ्नेहरूमध्ये कमसेकम 1 लाखलाई प्रत्येक आर्थिक वर्षमा रोजगार दिने गरी हामी प्राविधिक शिक्षण संस्थानमा जोड्ने भनेर हामीले 140वटा विद्यालय गत साल प्राविधिक खास गरी पढ्दै कमाउँदै भनेर छनौट गऱ्यौँ। त्यहाँ चाहिँ विद्यार्थीहरू जोडिरहनु भएको छ। त्यसपछि यो वर्ष हामीले अब 100वटा छनौट गर्दैछौँ छिट्टै। त्यसले गर्दा झन्डै 250 जति विद्यालयहरूमा पढ्दै कमाउँदै हामी कार्यान्वयन गर्छौँ। पालिकाले साझेदारी गर्ने ठाउँमा प्रतिष्ठानमा हामीले माग भएअनुसार र नपुगेको पालिकामा चाहिँ निर्णय गर्दै गइरहेका छौँ र त्यसले पनि चाहिँ कतिपय जनशक्तिहरू उत्पादन गर्ने काम गरिराखेको छ।
मानेज्यू, यो विदेशबाट फर्किएकाहरूको सहज रूपमा सिप परीक्षण गर्नलाई र उहाँले सिकेर आउनुभएको जति पनि सिप छन् त्यसमाथि पनि नवीन सिपहरू स्वदेशमा विकास र विस्तार गर्नको लागि मन्त्रालयले के काम कसरी गरिरहेको छ?
विदेशबाट आएकाहरू चाहिँ कतिपय राम्रा ठुल्ठुलो व्यवसाय गरेर सेट भएको पनि पाइन्छ। अब कतिपय चाहिँ उच्च मनोबल बनाएर अब देशमै केही गर्छु भनेर आएर सानोतिनो लगानी गरेको हकमा केही ब्याङ्कको समस्या, केही कानुनी समस्या, कृषिको चक्लाबन्दीको समस्या, यी समस्याहरूले चाहिँ अलिअलि व्यवसायीहरू निरुत्साहित भएको र फेरि पनि उनीहरू त्यो पेसा छोडेर फेरि चाहिँ पर्सनल रोजगारमा नै फर्केको पनि हामी पाउँछौँ। तर फेरि पनि अब यो एउटा मेसेज के हो भने नेपालमा केही पनि गर्न सकिँदैन, केही सम्भावना छैन भन्ने कुरा गलत हो। आजभन्दा 20 वर्ष पहिलेको नेपाल, 20-30-40 वर्ष पहिलेको नेपालमा त हाम्रा बाबुबाजे पुर्खाहरूले हामीलाई पढाए के अरे बाहिर गएर चाहिँ रोजगारीबाटै जोडिएर आएर गराए त होइनन्। आफै गराएका थिए, कृषि गराएका थिए, मेहनत गराएका थिए, आफै श्रम पनि गराएका थिए। त्यसकारणले राज्यले व्यवस्था गर्ने कुरामा पनि अपूर्णता छ। मानसिकता पनि कस्तो भयो भनेदेखि यहाँ केही पनि हुन सक्दैन, नेपालमा केही पनि गर्न सकिँदैन भनेर जनसमुदायहरू, युवाहरू चाहिँ गाउँ छोडेर जाने स्थिति चाहिँ विकास भयो। यसको कहीँ न कहीँ हामीले शिक्षाको प्रसङ्ग जोडेर यहाँले राख्नुभयो भने समग्र राज्यले नै शिक्षा, स्वास्थ्य र रोजगारमा जनतालाई संविधानले दिए अनुरूप जोड्ने कुरामा गम्भीरतापूर्वक राज्यले नयाँ नीति पोलिसी बनाउनु जरुरी छ।
श्रम, रोजगार तथा सामाजिक सुरक्षा मन्त्री माननीय शेर बहादुर कुँवरसँग मैले वैदेशिक रोजगारीमा जानेहरूलाई सिप सिकाउन मन्त्रालयले के पहल गरिरहेको छ, विदेशबाट फर्केर आएकाहरूको सिप पहिचान तथा परीक्षण गर्ने सम्बन्धमा के पहल भइरहेको छ भनेर सोधेकी छु। रोजगारीमा विदेश जान जति पनि आकांक्षा राख्ने दाजुभाइ दिदीबहिनीहरू हुनुहुन्छ उहाँहरूलाई हातमा सिप दिएर पठाउनको लागि मन्त्रालयले के योजनाहरू बनाएको छ सर?
हामीसँग सिप विकास तालिम केन्द्र भैँसीपाटीमा छ। त्यसलाई प्रतिष्ठानको रूपमा कसरी लैजाने, सातै प्रदेशमा सिप विकास केन्द्रलाई कसरी लैजाने र बजेटले पनि यसलाई सम्बोधन गरेको छ। र अब उपरान्त हाम्रो देशका मजदुरहरू अनस्किल, अदक्ष नहुन् र दक्ष जनशक्ति उत्पादन गर्ने देश हो भनेर नै हामीले पहिचान बनाउन सकौँ भन्ने उद्देश्यले नै हामी त्यसै गरेका छौँ।
त्यो गन्तव्य देशमा बसाइ त्यति सुरक्षित भएन भन्ने कुराहरू समय समयमा हामीले सुन्छौँ।
असुरक्षित हुनुको एउटै कारण हो हामी अदक्ष भएको कारण। हाम्रा डाक्टरहरू सुरक्षित हुन्छन्, हाम्रा इन्जिनियरहरू सुरक्षित हुन्छन्, हाम्रा सेमी स्किल अर्धदक्ष हाम्रा स्टाफ नर्सहरू उहाँहरू पनि सुरक्षित हुनुहुन्छ। त त्यस कारणले हामीले सिप विकासलाई बढी जोड दिएका छौँ र मर्यादित श्रमलाई पनि जोड दिएका छौँ। प्लेनमा चढ्नुभन्दा अगाडि स्यालेरीको एउटा सम्झौता हुन्छ, प्लेनमा चढिसकेपछि अर्को सम्झौता हुन्छ। त्यसैले मर्यादित र व्यवस्थित श्रमिकहरूलाई रिटर्न दिएर र उहाँहरूले पाउने पारिश्रमिकको बारेमा र उहाँहरूलाई आइपर्ने जस्तै स्वास्थ्य सम्बन्धी समस्याहरू आउलान्, भोलि बिरामी भएर कहीँ हस्पिटलमा रहनुभएको छ, होइन कहीँ अप्ठ्यारो स्थितिमा बस्नुभएको छ, त त्यसलाई व्यवस्थित गर्ने र मर्यादित गर्ने कुरा नै हामी कार्यान्वयनको पक्षमा छौँ र कार्यान्वयन गर्नतिर पनि हामी लागिरहेका छौँ।
वैदेशिक रोजगारीबाट फर्किसकेकाहरूको लागि चाहिँ यो सिप परीक्षण अथवा पहिचानको काम पनि मन्त्रालयले कहीँ कतै कुनै पाटोमा गरिरहेको छ या छैन?
अवश्य त्यसको लागि त हामीले कानुन नै बनाइसक्यौँ, त्यसको लागि त नीति नै बनाइसक्यौँ। हाम्रो जवानी छौन्जेलसम्म, रगत छौन्जेलसम्म, युवा छौन्जेलसम्म त हामी गिटी पनि कुट्न सक्छौँ, हामी बालुवा पनि बोक्न सक्छौँ, हामी अत्यन्त हार्ड लेबर भनौँ न, एउटा कठिन कामहरू पनि गर्न सक्छौँ। तर विदेशबाट जब हामी अशक्त हुन्छौँ, कमजोर हुन्छौँ, त्यति बेला त सिप ल्याएर आएका हुन्छौँ। अनि त्यति बेला त हामीले केही पुँजी पनि ल्याएर आएका हुन्छौँ। त्यसैले विदेशबाट फर्केका नेपाली दाजुभाइहरूलाई सामाजिक र आर्थिक कार्यक्रममा उहाँहरूलाई एकाउन्ट गर्नको लागि भनेर हामीले एउटा निर्देशिका जारी गरेका छौँ। त्यसमा हामीले थप सामाजिक सुरक्षा कोषबाट होस् या हाम्रो वैदेशिक रोजगार बोर्डमा हुने कल्याणकारी कोषबाट होस्, त्यसमा पनि हामीले एउटा थोरै ब्याजमा हामीले लगानी गरिदिने, स्थानीय पालिकाको उपप्रमुख उपाध्यक्षको अध्यक्षतामा र वैदेशिक रोजगारीबाट फर्केका दाजुभाइहरूलाई पनि विज्ञको रूपमा त्यहाँ राख्ने र चाहिँ हाम्रा गन्तव्य देशहरू छन्। तपाईँहरूको देश निर्माणमा हाम्रा श्रमिकहरूको ठुलो योगदान रह्यो। ती श्रमिकहरू घर फर्कँदैछन्, बुढो भएर अशक्त भएर फर्कँदै हुनुहुन्छ, उहाँहरूलाई पनि हामीले सुरक्षित गर्नको लागि हाम्रो देशमा तपाईँहरूले पनि लगानी गर्नु पर्यो। ल त्यसैले त्यो लगानीको लागि पनि उहाँहरूलाई आह्वान गर्ने र आग्रह गर्ने।
अब हामी सहकर्मी मिताली ओलीले युरोपियन युनियन र नेपालको सहकार्यले प्रवासमा रहेका नागरिकलाई कसरी सहयोग पुगेको छ, वैदेशिक रोजगारीबाट फर्किएकाहरूको पुनर्एकीकरणको काम कसरी भइरहेको छ भन्ने सम्बन्धमा युरोपियन युनियनका हेड अफ कोअपरेसन डाक्टर मार्को गेमरसँग गरेको कुराकानी प्रस्तुत गर्दैछौँ।
So I'd like to start the conversation about the cooperation of EU and Nepal, especially on the issues of migration. Why is EU cooperating in Nepal on migration issues and how?
Migration in Nepal is a very special element because most of the migrants emigrating from Nepal are labor migrants. So they are going to other countries to seek employment. We also have a lot of students going abroad to Europe with our Erasmus program, but also to the Indian job market or for education. So if we focus now on the labor migration, it's more than 400,000 Nepali young people leaving the country every year. So automatically this means these people are not available on the labor market in Nepal. When COVID-19 hit the globe in 2020, a lot of these labor migrants came back to Nepal, and I think not only in Nepal, many countries were not prepared for this flow, immediate flow of returning people. What needed to be done is to deal with the situation immediately, and this is why the European Union has provided funding through our TVET practical partnership we have with the government, and in cooperation with 3 key partners we have here. Because I think all over the world it was very difficult for any government, for any society to deal with the situation. So we decided to work in the broader migration aspect with these returning migrants to learn from their experience. How can we make sure that the skills they have learned overseas is being used in Nepal? Talk to the market, to the private sector. Sometimes they needed a formalization of these skills. They did something overseas which was not recognized in Nepal. What did the government need to do in terms of formalizing or reskilling them for the current job situation? So many things had to be done, and this is why we, given this very quick and very severe exposure of society, having so many people coming back, we decided to work on the broader migration aspect, on the labor migration, together with the existing instruments we had as a COVID recovery, as a COVID response, where we could help the Nepali people.
Together with the government, the private sector and development partners, EU has been supporting Nepal's TVET sector reform. Please share the significant benefits that these reforms will bring to the country from the perspective of EU.
I think what the pandemic has shown us is there will not be no recovery from COVID, no long-term recovery, if there's no education. While education is important in any country, it is especially important for Nepal to make the transition from a least developed countries to a developing country, and then hopefully very soon to a country at equal height as other countries. Education is key to transform the economy. Education is key to provide skilled labor, to increase the salaries of people in the labor market, for them to have a higher standard of living, for them to have more opportunities. Nepal is a big country with 30 million people. You often forget that. But in terms of many of our European Union member states, with 30 million people, Nepal would be one of the top 6 member states. So what about the domestic market? Nepal could become a domestic market for the own laborers. But there needs to be a system in place which needs to be driven and supported by the government in order to have quality education, and especially when we talk about post-secondary education, skilled labor that is available to the job market. So Nepal came a very long way and has made great achievements, while the economy has transformed, but the education was always lacking behind the needs of the labor market. So what we are trying to do together with our partners in 2 projects we are funding, one is implemented by the British Council, one is implemented by CTVT, so a government agency, and especially with the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, to make sure that the curricula are up to date, that the curricula serve the needs of the labor market. While of course we want more young people to be in employment, because still, while we have a high number of migrant youth, 40% of Nepal is regarded as young people, so you're a young nation. But the same number of young people is not in employment or education. And this in long term will be very difficult for Nepal if Nepal wants to develop economically and be a nice and good place to live, with many happy Nepali, as is written in the 15th National Development Plan.
सहकर्मी मिताली ओलीले ब्रिटिश काउन्सिल नेपालका कन्ट्री डाइरेक्टर शाहिदा मैकडोगलसँग प्राविधिक तथा व्यावसायिक शिक्षा तथा तालिमका लागि साझेदारी योजना दक्षता परियोजनाका विविध आयामका बारेमा कुराकानी गर्नुभएको छ।
Ms. Shahida, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mitali, and thank you for having me, and namaste, everyone.
Ms. Shahida, let's start the conversation about the Dakshata. What was the context of introducing Dakshata project in Nepal?
Dakshata is our TVET practical partnership project. It's a 5-year program which was funded, is funded by the European Union and managed by the British Council and delivered in close partnership with the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology, in close coordination with the Ministry and our private and public sector colleagues. The purpose of the project is to develop an effective and responsive technical and vocational education and training system that produces skilled workforce to meet the growing needs of Nepal's economy. I'd like to say a few words about British Council, if I may. British Council, we strongly believe that all men and women, especially young people, and women and girls, should be able to have every opportunity to enhance their skills, knowledge and networks. And here in Nepal, the British Council has been privileged and proud to be working with the government of Nepal and many different international and local international organizations for over 63 years now. Nepal is facing high levels of unemployment, especially among those under 25. And yet employers consistently report that they are unable to recruit people with the right skills to develop their businesses and industries. And Nepal's growth depends on bridging this gap between the supply and demand side. And this is where British Council, through projects like Dakchya, can offer practical solutions. With millions of Nepalese overseas workers forced by pandemic to return to Nepal, Dakchya conceptualized a program to address some of the many skills-related challenges faced by returning migrant workers. We're really excited to partner with 3 UN agencies, ILO, IOM and UNDP, on the skilling of returning migrant workers. And this collaboration will generate evidence on future skills needs, promotes the upskilling of migrant workers and identify new opportunities for migrant returnees to successfully reintegrate into the labour market. And this partnership will create the enabling environment to develop the minds and passion to learn, especially for young people, to help them to acquire the vital knowledge and skills that will equip them for many more challenges of living, adapting and learning in the real world.
Ms. Shahida, Dakchya project is now in a concluding stage. What were the major outcomes and the impact of the project? And are there any lessons learned you wish to share?
Over the last 5 years, the British Council, through Dakchya project, fostered relationships, developed products and set up targeted interventions that paves the way for lasting change in Nepal's Tibet sector. And just recently we concluded one of our first and biggest grant schemes, the 10 practical partnership pilot projects in construction, agriculture and tourism sectors, where we developed and piloted new and innovative approaches centered around the employee engagement at all phases of skill development system. And we've launched that in March 2020. We've trained over 4,000 learners, and out of those 44% were female and 41% were aged between 15 and 24 years old. An estimated 70% of these trainees are already in employment or have established their own businesses. We supported Ministry of Education of Science and Technology with analysis and development of a baseline of Tibet sector, which is the first for Nepal. We also supported the Ministry on developing the 10-year reform strategic plan, Tibet Reform Strategic Plan, which will provide, once it's approved, a robust framework for the government of Nepal, all Tibet stakeholders, including development partners, and help the government of Nepal to streamline allocation of all resources and divert them to the areas that requires them most. We also provided a direct grant to private sector to set up the employer-led labour market secretariat, through which, for the first time ever, it was possible for the private sector to lead the identification and articulation of the specific skills and knowledge the private sector need for the graduate of the Tibet training system. Dakchya is in a very strong position to embed real systemic change in the Tibet sector, with institutionalization approach adopted during the final years, paying dividends in terms of lasting structural changes to the way in which Tibet is designed, delivered and monitored now and in the future.
नेपालमा आप्रवासीको सुरक्षाको अवस्था कस्तो छ? कोभिड-19ले उनीहरुमा कस्तो प्रभाव पार्यो? यस परियोजनाले उनीहरुको सिप विकास गरेर पुनः एकीकरणका लागि कसरी काम गरिरहेको छ भन्ने सम्बन्धमा IOM का मिशन प्रमुख लोरेना लान्डोसँग सहकर्मी मिताली ओलीको कुराकानी प्रस्तुत गर्दैछौं।
Can you please highlight the migration situation, the protection of migrants and how COVID-19 has impacted them?
You know, we recently in 2021 we had the census in Nepal, and through the census the preliminary numbers give us a figure of 2.1 million of Nepali living abroad, whether it's for studies or whether it is for work. This is about 7.4% of the population. The numbers show us that there is people going to the Gulf, Malaysia, Korea, Asia, as much as also to India. Now, the migration to India doesn't have as much data available because you don't require visa to go to India. What is also what we saw with COVID is that over 1 million people return due to the impact of COVID and the pandemic in different countries. They also return home. And the reflection is also to see, and we know the migrants or the migration cycle, the competition is also with reintegration. So looking at what do I do once I come back home. Testimony, or we witness also that many people, because there is not opportunity back home, once they return back home, they actually opt for a second migration abroad. So one of the strategy of Nepal is also to look at it in terms of skillings. So what kind of skills are required abroad so that we can prepare our potential migrants with better skills and better knowledge in their hands, as much as value the skills that migrants bring back home. And again, how can we use these skills?
What are the major gaps in ensuring safe, orderly and regular migration?
That's very important. And we know that migration starts the moment I start thinking about migrating abroad, and making an informed decision on my migration opportunity is very much key. Success on your migration experience is also based on what do you know before you go, and are you making the right choice at a specific time in your life, and also do I have the skills. Now we see that for safe and regular migration there's different elements to it, and one of these is also skills.
IOM is currently implementing the project of generating evidence for future skills need of migrant workers in Nepal. Can you please highlight its objective and the area of intervention? And how does IOM plan to address the skill gaps of Nepali migrants and returnees' integration to Nepali labor market?
So, this is a project, it's a very important project, it's a priority for the government of Nepal. It's a project that is managed by the British Council through funding of the European Union. We are doing, one of the areas of work is actually a macro level studies on supply and demand of an analysis of skills that migrants have, but also what skills are needed abroad. So that's why working with vocational training is important, is that you can actually tailor your skills, your young generations, and giving tools and equipment and knowledge that can be used in the labor market. So learning better what is the mapping of these skills required by the private sectors as much as required by country of destinations, and also tailoring or identifying better the skills that migrants come back from abroad with their skills, and so how can they also be part of this data bank, let's say, where we actually have this knowledge, and all this knowledge can be actually used in the best way for the sustainable development also of Nepal. We would also like to see more being given the same opportunity, men and women, who wish to migrate abroad. So that's also something that government also need to take into consideration. So even in the vocational training, reflecting on courses can be also tailored for jobs that also women would like to gain skills about. So that's also part of the process. So a mapping of the skills that is available and mapping of the skills required in the labor market are part in areas of work of IOM. Also raising awareness on safe migration is always, as I said, important. Informed decision is what we want to see more and more.
आजको कार्यक्रमको निर्धारित समय सकिएको छ। अर्को हप्ता वैदेशिक रोजगारी, सिप र यससँग सम्बन्धित विविध विषयवस्तु लिएर उपस्थित हुनेछौँ। हस्त नमस्ते।